My child. Before this message reaches its deepest truth, I need you to quiet your heart for a moment. What you are about to hear is not an ordinary story. It is a message about hidden choices, silent betrayals, and a truth that remained buried for far too long. For years, you wondered why everything suddenly changed between you and your married soulmate. You blamed yourself. They blamed themselves. But neither of you knew that another hand was quietly shaping your destiny from the shadows. Listen carefully. There was a season when your hearts understood each other without needing many words. Even when distance separated you, there was still an invisible thread connecting your souls. That connection frightened someone who believed your love would change everything they had carefully planned. Instead of allowing your story to grow naturally, they chose deception over honesty. They whispered lies, hid important conversations, and created misunderstandings that slowly built walls between both of you. Neither you nor your soulmate could see the trap because it was carefully designed to look like ordinary life. Don't skip. Your married soulmate carried unanswered questions into their marriage. They smiled in front of everyone, but deep inside they often wondered why your sudden silence never made sense. There were nights when they secretly looked through old memories, trying to understand what had really happened. Every answer they found only created another mystery. The more they searched, the more impossible your separation seemed. They convinced themselves that perhaps destiny had simply chosen a different path, yet their heart refused to believe that explanation. Meanwhile, the person responsible for separating both of you lived with a constant fear that the truth would someday rise to the surface. Every unexpected phone call, every forgotten letter, every old photograph became a reminder of the secret they had buried. They knew that if your soulmate ever discovered what had truly happened, years of carefully protected lies would collapse in a single moment. Time continued to move forward, but truth has something remarkable about it. It never disappears forever. It simply waits for the right moment to reveal itself. One ordinary day, your married soulmate unexpectedly came across something they had never seen before. It was not planned. It was not searched for. It simply appeared when they least expected it. At first, it looked insignificant, almost easy to ignore. But as they looked closer, small details began connecting with memories they had carried for years. Don't skip. Their heartbeat became faster. Questions they had buried long ago suddenly returned with greater force. Why had certain conversations ended so strangely? Why had specific people always discouraged them whenever your name was mentioned? Why did every important decision somehow benefit someone else while leaving both of you heartbroken? For the first time since their marriage, they stopped blaming fate. Instead, they began questioning every event that had separated you. The more they remembered, the clearer the pattern became. Every misunderstanding had been encouraged by the same hidden influence. Every missed opportunity carried the fingerprints of someone who never wanted your love story to survive. That realization shook them more deeply than anyone around them could imagine. They were no longer looking at the past with regret alone. They were beginning to understand that their entire future had been redirected by someone else's selfish choices. As the evening became quieter, your soulmate sat alone, holding those memories with trembling hands. Tears slowly filled their eyes, not because they had finally found the truth, but because they realized how much precious time had been stolen from both of you. Years that could have been filled with laughter had instead become years filled with unanswered questions. They whispered only one sentence into the silence. What if everything I believed was a lie? And at that exact moment, another shocking piece of evidence was about to appear, one that would finally reveal the identity of the person who had secretly destroyed your love story. Their question refused to leave their mind. Every hour that passed only made the silence feel heavier. They could no longer pretend that the discovery meant nothing. Something deep inside kept saying that the truth was much bigger than a single misunderstanding. It was a carefully planned chain of events that had changed two lives forever. As they looked through old memories again, forgotten details suddenly began fitting together like pieces of a puzzle they had been trying to solve for years. Don't skip. Late that evening, your married soulmate quietly opened a small box that had remained untouched since before the wedding. Inside were old photographs, a few handwritten notes, and several keepsakes that everyone believed had lost their importance. But this time, they noticed something completely different. One date written on an old note matched the exact day everything suddenly changed between you. Another message seemed incomplete, as if someone had intentionally removed part of it. The deeper they looked, the more obvious it became that someone had interfered with the truth long before either of you realized it. Their hands trembled. They remembered a conversation that once seemed harmless. At the time, someone had confidently told them, "You should stop waiting. They have already moved on." Those words had sounded believable because they came from someone they trusted completely. But now that same memory felt different. Why had they accepted it without hearing from you directly? Why had they allowed another person to speak for your heart? The answer hurt. Because trust had been placed in the wrong person. Don't skip. For the first time in years, your soulmate stopped defending the people who had influenced their decisions. Instead, they began questioning every promise, every warning, and every piece of advice they had received. One by one, the memories exposed a disturbing pattern. Whenever they tried to reconnect with you, someone always appeared with another excuse. Whenever hope began returning, another rumor mysteriously destroyed it. Nothing had been accidental. That realization brought tears they could no longer hide. They quietly whispered your name, wondering how many times you had been waiting for an explanation that never came. They imagined the pain you must have carried while believing they had chosen to walk away. The thought became unbearable. Their heart filled with regret, not because they had forgotten you, but because they finally understood how easily the truth had been stolen from both of you. As midnight approached, they made a decision they had never dared to make before. They would stop believing old stories. They would begin searching for facts. The very next morning, they started contacting people from the past. Some refused to answer. Others claimed they remembered nothing. But one elderly relative reacted differently. The moment your name was mentioned, an uncomfortable silence filled the conversation. That silence lasted only a few seconds, yet it revealed more than words ever could. Your soulmate immediately sensed that this person knew something important. They gently asked again. Please. Tell me the truth. Who kept us apart? The relative lowered their eyes. They hesitated. Years of guilt seemed to weigh heavily upon them. Finally, with a trembling voice, they admitted that they had witnessed conversations they were never supposed to hear. They had watched someone manipulate both families, twist simple misunderstandings into permanent separation, and make sure neither of you ever received the full truth. Don't skip. Your soulmate felt their entire world shaking. Every heartbeat seemed louder than before. The mystery was no longer about whether someone had destroyed your love story. Now it had become a search for one specific person. And the relative was finally ready to reveal the very first name connected to the betrayal. The room became completely silent. Your married soulmate could hear nothing except the sound of their own heartbeat. They had spent years believing that fate had separated the two of you, but now an eyewitness was sitting in front of them, carrying a truth that had been hidden for far too long. Every second of silence felt heavier than the last. Don't skip. The relative slowly looked into your soulmate's eyes and said, I have wanted to tell you this for years, but I was afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. I thought time would bury everything, but instead, it buried your happiness. Those words struck like lightning. Your soulmate leaned forward, unable to hide their emotions. Please, they whispered, don't protect anyone anymore. I have already lost enough time. The relative nodded. I never saw your love disappear. I watched someone destroy it. For a moment, it became difficult to breathe. The relative explained that long before the marriage, there had been a series of private conversations held behind closed doors. During those meetings, one person repeatedly insisted that you and your soulmate should never be together. They spread doubts, exaggerated misunderstandings, and convinced others that separating both of you was the only wise decision. Slowly, those lies reached family members, close friends, and eventually your soulmate. Every false story had been carefully timed. Every rumor had a purpose. Every silence had been created intentionally. Don't skip. Your soulmate suddenly remembered several strange moments that had never made sense before. Important messages had mysteriously disappeared. Phone calls had ended before they could explain themselves. Plans to meet had been cancelled without clear reasons. Whenever they tried to take one step toward you, something unexpected always pushed them backward. At the time, those events felt like terrible luck. Now they looked like pieces of a carefully planned betrayal. The relative continued speaking. There was one day I almost told you everything. I even came to your house. But before I could speak, that same person arrived first. They convinced everyone that reopening the past would only create more pain. I stayed silent. And I have regretted that silence every single day. Tears filled the relatives' eyes. Your soulmate wasn't angry anymore. They were heartbroken. Not only because someone had manipulated the truth, but because several people had remained silent when one honest conversation could have changed everything. As they left the house that evening, they didn't drive home immediately. Instead, they parked beside a quiet place and sat alone, staring at the sky. Memories kept returning one after another: your smile, your voice, the promises that had once felt unbreakable. For the first time since the marriage, they allowed themselves to imagine a different life. A life where no one had interfered. A life where your love story had been allowed to grow naturally. Don't skip. They quietly whispered, if I had known the truth then, everything would have been different. Just then, their phone vibrated. It wasn't an ordinary notification. It was a message from someone they had not heard from in years, someone who had been present during the very beginning of your love story. The message contained only one sentence. I know who started the lies. And I still have the proof. Your soulmate froze. They immediately realized that the mystery was about to become even bigger, because the proof wasn't just going to reveal what happened. It was finally going to expose who secretly destroyed your love story and why they were so desperate to keep the truth hidden. The message stayed on the screen for several long seconds. Your married soulmate read it again. And again. As if their heart could not accept what their eyes were seeing. They had waited years for answers, and now someone was claiming to have proof that the entire love story had been destroyed on purpose. Don't skip. Without wasting another moment, they replied with only 3 words. I'm ready. Please. Several minutes passed with no response. Those few minutes felt longer than the previous several years. Every possibility raced through their mind. Was this person telling the truth? Had they really kept evidence all this time? Or was this simply another cruel misunderstanding waiting to break their heart again? Finally, another message appeared. Meet me tomorrow. Bring no one. Some truths should only be heard by the person who lived them. Your soulmate agreed immediately. That entire night they could not sleep. They replayed every memory from the past, searching for moments they had ignored. Faces they once trusted suddenly looked different in their mind. Conversations that had seemed ordinary now sounded carefully rehearsed. Even the smallest details began making painful sense. As sunrise arrived, they quietly left home and traveled to the meeting place. It was an old cafe where very few people ever visited anymore. An elderly man was already sitting near the window. The moment your soulmate walked in, the man stood up with tears in his eyes. I prayed this day would finally come, he said softly. Don't skip. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then the man reached into an old leather bag and carefully placed a sealed envelope on the table. I promised myself I would never destroy this, he whispered. One day, I believed the truth would need a voice. Your soulmate slowly opened the envelope. Inside were several old handwritten notes, copies of messages, and one small diary page. The handwriting was immediately familiar. It belonged to the very person everyone had trusted the most. As they began reading, their hands started trembling. The notes revealed a shocking pattern. The same individual had repeatedly instructed others not to pass your messages along. They had encouraged false assumptions whenever either of you tried to reconnect. They had even celebrated every failed attempt that brought more distance between you. It was never about protecting anyone. It was about control. Every page exposed another hidden decision. Every sentence uncovered another deliberate lie. Don't skip. The elderly man quietly said, I watched it happen. At first, I believed they were trying to help both families avoid conflict. Later, I realized they weren't protecting anyone. They were protecting their own interests. Your soulmate lowered their head. Tears fell onto the diary pages. Years of confusion were finally turning into painful clarity. They whispered your name. I should have searched harder. The elderly man gently replied, Don't blame yourself forever. The truth was hidden from you with great care. Very few people could have discovered it back then. Those words brought a small amount of peace. But only for a moment. Because as your soulmate reached the final page of the diary, something unexpected slipped out from between the papers. It was an old photograph. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten sentence that made their heart stop. If this picture is ever found, everything I did will finally be exposed. Your soulmate slowly turned the photograph over. And the face staring back at them was someone they had never imagined could be responsible for destroying your love story. The photograph slipped from your soulmate's trembling hands onto the table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The face in that photograph belonged to someone who had always appeared kind, trustworthy, and supportive. They had attended family gatherings, offered comforting advice, and convinced everyone they only wanted peace. No one had ever imagined that behind those gentle words was the very person who had quietly destroyed two hearts. Your married soulmate picked up the photograph once more, unable to believe what they were seeing. Every memory suddenly changed. Every conversation sounded different. Every warning they had once trusted now carried a hidden meaning. Don't skip. The elderly man quietly broke the silence. They feared your love because they knew it was real. They believed that if the two of you stayed together, they would lose the influence they held over both families. So they chose manipulation instead of honesty. Those words answered the question that had haunted your soulmate for years. It had never been a lack of love. It had never been fate. It had never been because you stopped caring. It had been because someone had deliberately rewritten your story. Tears rolled down your soulmate's face as they whispered your name. I spent years believing you gave up on us. When in reality, you were fighting a battle I never even knew existed. For the first time since their marriage, they stopped carrying anger toward you. Instead, they carried regret. Regret for every message that was never answered. Regret for every chance that was stolen. Regret for every moment they believed a lie instead of searching for the truth. Don't skip. That evening, your soulmate returned home with a heart that felt both broken and healed. Broken because the truth had arrived too late. Healed because the mystery was finally over. They opened an old journal and wrote one final sentence. True love didn't fail. Honesty did. From that day forward, they refused to repeat the mistakes of the past. They chose truth over rumors, courage over fear, and honesty over silence. The secret that had once controlled so many lives no longer had any power, because once the truth is revealed, deception can never fully return. As they looked toward the evening sky one last time, they quietly smiled through their tears. Wherever you are, they whispered, I hope you finally know. You were never the reason our love story ended. And with that realization, the weight they had carried for so many years slowly began to fade. Sometimes life cannot rewrite yesterday. But the truth can finally set the heart free.